Hey guys, John Eichberger with the Fuels Institute. You know, as we come out of the coronavirus shutdown, I'm talking to a lot of people and I keep getting the same question from so many is, has the shutdown affected the trajectory of the electric vehicle market? We know it's affected the automobile manufacturing industry significantly, but what effect does it have on EVs as a whole? So I gave John Gartner a call, and John and I have known each other for years. He's been one of the guys who's worked on so many projects for the Fuels Institute, expert in the electric vehicle market. Ask him what he thinks is going to happen with the EVs, what's going to happen with the cost parity compared to internal combustion engines, and real specifically to Fuels Institute's heart is, what do we need to do about infrastructure, and how are we moving along to develop the infrastructure to support the growing EV market? Listen to Carpool Chats today with John Gartner. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time. John, how's it going, man?
Doing well. Great to see you.
Yeah, everything going all right out there in Colorado?
Yes, sunny and 90+ degrees. Enjoying the summer here.
Yeah, it kind of is that way too. Finally, summer hit in Virginia. It's been a while waiting for it to come. Hey, I wanted to catch up with you. I've been talking to a lot of people the last few weeks. I keep getting pretty much the same question from everybody. With the coronavirus shutdown and the impact on the automobile manufacturing industry, people keep asking me, so John, does that mean that the transition to electric vehicles is going to slow down? Or what's the prognosis? And we had a speaker at Fuels 2020 talk about it a little bit, but I want to get your thoughts. You've been working in the EV space for years. What do you see happening? Is there any type of change in the trajectory based upon the shutdowns?
Yeah, I think there is obviously an effect today, and it will continue at least through the rest of the year. And I think as you've seen, there's some forecasters saying, well, the hit in the EV market may not be quite as pronounced as the overall automotive market. Sales are down across the board, but EV sales have been down to a lesser degree, and I think that'll continue. It's really dependent on the economic downturn as prompted by the virus. I think there's a couple of conflicting factors. On the one hand, obviously, people have less money to spend. People aren't going to car dealerships, ordering cars of any type, kind of being more conservative with their finances. And obviously, you have mass unemployment. So those are all factors against the EV market growing. And of course, the auto manufacturers recognize this and are being a little slower in introducing. Vehicles been pushed back till 2021. So I think it's really going to start turning around probably at some point next year. At the long term, I don't see this. It's really more of a hiccup than really a trend that's going to last. One of the positives from all of this is, as I mentioned, for people who have been stayed employed, and obviously you have a lot less things to do for your discretionary income, and there's going to be pent-up demand. People, as I said, haven't been buying cars, they haven't been taking trips, they haven't been shopping in general to the same degree, and so the people who have been buying EVs tend to be a little higher in their incomes. They will want to spend once this starts turning around and the economy starts an uptick. So we think that it's a good thing for the EV industry in that next year to subsequent year timeframe, because people will want to spend and they'll have more money because they haven't been spending on other things.
You know, we saw some results from Deloitte's consumer surveys and the people's interest in their level of importance they attribute to a personal vehicle. A KPMG survey came out and said there's like half of the people who are in the market to buy a car before the shutdown are more likely to buy a car now because this feeling of a personal safety space within their vehicle. And, you know, I think what I've been hearing from a lot of the people in the EV market is some of what you just said. The EV continues to gain traction. Everything in the automotive industry slowed down, but that seems to, because of the incentives, because of the requirements, because of the policies, because of the dedication of the OEMs, it seems like that's going to recover faster than the rest of the automotive industry.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And also, as I said, some launches of the new vehicles have been delayed from 2020 to 2021. Mm-hmm. But there is a number of vehicles on the horizon, very exciting vehicles in new categories. A lot of pickup trucks, some larger SUVs, what Ford's doing with the Mach-E. So I think there will be a lot of interest, as you said, next year. And it is true that that personal space, sort of being in control, maybe a little less likely to take mass transit in the future as we continue to have concerns about getting infections in the public domain. Those are all true. One other factor, I think, is for EVs particularly, is the fact that we're experiencing cleaner skies than we've had in many urban areas than in decades. Certainly you've seen places like Los Angeles and Houston because there's been less overall travel. Well, some people are going to think about that, like, well, yeah, we could have similar levels of travel and traffic, but if they were all EVs, we could still have that cleaner air. And so I think that won't be lost on some consumers to think, can we have our cake and eat it too, in terms of, yeah, get back to having personal mobility, but then also have the health benefits of a cleaner environment.
It was really kind of a proof case because, people stopped driving so much. About half of the miles traveled came off the grid, but the utilities continue to produce electricity. And so this concept that utility production is a poor substitute for internal combustion engines really kind of got disproven during this shutdown, which, I saw the satellite photos too. It's dramatic, the impact on NOx pollution that came from that. And it's important that we keep in mind, it's not all about carbon. We get blinded. It's all about carbon. It's the tailpipe emissions. It's criteria pollutants. It's everything that affects public health and the environment needs to be considered. So I think there's definitely an argument to be made to continue the progress. And you were absolutely right. There are some exciting new vehicles coming on the market next year and the following year that are electrified. And I think we're finally starting to see the models being delivered that consumers are looking to buy, but now they have an electric powertrain. Now, one of the big questions I have for you is total cost of ownership. So the Fuels Institute just released a report in June that looked at infrastructure, but also had a total cost of ownership calculator. And within that, there's some demonstrations where when the tax credit, the $7,500 federal tax credit is in place, it's very easy to say the EV is going to be much cheaper to own, operate over a period of time than internal combustion engine. But when that tax credit is taken away, they become much closer in terms of total cost of ownership. The EV still has an advantage, but it's not as dramatic. What do you think about the impact of the tax credit? I know you've written some stuff about batteries prices are coming down. We should get to price parity here pretty soon, but how long is that tax credit going to be required to make it a justifiable purchase for the consumer?
Yeah, I think there's been a psychological effect of that, of getting something at a discount, right? It helps even beyond the one-to-one dollar value to say, hey, I got $5,000 off, I got $7,500 off, et cetera. There's a lot of value in that, even beyond the actual savings. The good part is, as you said, battery prices are going down. Vehicles, there is really cost parity in certain classes. When you're talking about performance vehicles, when you're talking about buying a Tesla or one of the Mercedes-Benz or BMW vehicles, whether it's electrified or not, they're in the same price range today, even without any incentive. But it is an important psychological thing to say, hey, I'm getting something off that makes the vehicle look even more attractive. I think parity, as I said, is there in some cases, but it will be much more clear that in a number of cases in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see more and more vehicles, electrified vehicles in the sub $40,000 range. And if you look at the average transaction price, last year, of course, all-time high, 38,000 plus. Right. So many EVs are an average priced car. And you also have to consider that they come with a lot of bells and whistles. They come with the greatest technology, with all the telematics, with all the really advantages in terms of safety. So, you can say, oh yeah, you can still get a new car for $18,000, but it's not really apples to apples when you're talking about EVs.
It's not the same as one of these EVs coming on the market. You're right. The other thing about these new cars is the range has improved. And we used to talk, when you and I first started talking about EVs several years ago, it was like, well, the range is 90 miles. That's not going to satisfy the consumer. Even though they only drive 40 miles a day, it's not going to be satisfactory. How much do you have to recharge? But now you're getting vehicles 300, 400 mile range, typical in that price range that's competitive. So that leads me to the question about infrastructure. So again, this report we just released, and we just launched the Electric Vehicle Council earlier this year, which you're helping with. I appreciate that. Looking at infrastructure and how we develop a charging system that satisfies the needs of the EV drivers today and in the future. But we recognize a couple of things. One, the demographic profile of the EV buyer today is likely going to evolve over the next 10 years to be more heterogeneous and more reflective of the population at large, which means the desires, the needs, the interests, the preferences will start to shift a little bit as we see more apartment dwellers buying EVs. But that also raises the question, how much infrastructure do we need? One of the findings in our report was so much of the infrastructure, you look at the DOE alternative fuel data center, this bears it out too. So much level 2 charging is in the market with very little DC fast charging. How important is that charging infrastructure now that we're seeing these 300, 400-mile range vehicles? How important is it, and where should we be focusing our attention to make sure that we're giving the customers the electricity they need, when they need it, and how they need it?
Right, right. Yeah, very good points about the changing demographic. So I think there will be long-term value in both the level 2 and the DC fast charging. They're different applications, different type of customers. You mentioned multi-unit dwelling residents, people who don't have necessarily a dedicated parking spot, or even people who live in the cities in row homes. Anybody who doesn't have dedicated a driveway, any place to reliably have access to electricity. Those consumers will be more likely to use fast charging because they just don't have another option. And it's really not an option to sit there and expect, you know, that you're going to have your car somewhere that you don't want to be for many, many hours consecutively. So on the level 2 side, you're talking about parking garages, entertainment experiences, where you could be there for 3 or 4 hours. It's really that long dwell person where on a multi-unit dwelling, if they do have several spots, and you're starting to see a lot more interest from the big real estate companies, as well as, from legislators who are requiring EV charging to be 20% of all parking spots at multi-unit developments, as well as parking garages. Their long dwell you can get by with the level 2. The DC fast charging, much more investment these days. It's really where the trend is going because people want to get in and get out. And there are so many locations where you're there for under an hour and you can get a very viable charge through a fast charger as the power ratings are getting higher, the vehicles are able to take faster charges, and of course also, as you mentioned, they're getting higher driving range. So you can store more energy in those batteries to be able to go several days without another charge if you do the occasional DC fast charge. So places like convenience stores and gas stations where you're going to be there for a bit of time, but certainly not for many hours at a time, are really suitable locations for fast charging. Workplaces is another place where you may see fleets or companies that are looking at trying to have that higher turnover rate and to recognize some value from offering that as a service as well. But it's really long dwell versus short dwell, and what percentage of the infrastructure makeup that will comprise.
Yeah, you know, when I've been talking to people who are thinking about putting in chargers or looking at strategies, my focus has always been, look, right now, there are not that many vehicles that can take a 350 kilowatt charge. There's not that many vehicles who can avail themselves of the technology for electricity delivery that exists in the market. But these are long-lived assets. So if you're going to be investing $50,000 or $500,000, depending on the structure and the nature of the system you want to put in, you need to build it for the next 5 to 10 years. And think about, in the next 10 years, that rapid DC fast charge of 75 to 100 miles in 5 minutes, 10 minutes is going to become the norm. And so I've been encouraging people, look, build for the future. Invest in capacity, invest in a system that can deliver the best value to your customer, maybe not today, but in 5 to 6 years when they're going to demand it. And if you don't have that kind of capacity and that kind of capability, they're going to go someplace else.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And really, you can sort of play the middle, if you will, by focusing on capacity, so you don't have to go in and do more wiring, do other system drops, even if you don't buy the chargers today. So if you can put in, for example, if you want to charge multiple vehicles, you can put in half a megawatt or up to a megawatt of capacity there, but then buy lower power chargers today, or only put in a couple of chargers today if that's the volume that'll satisfy, and then look towards adding more chargers, which, you know, the 350 kilowatt chargers today are not inexpensive, but they will get better in 2 to 3 years. So yeah, you don't have to go whole hog and say, okay, I'm going to put in 6 350 kilowatt chargers, you know, even in 2020, but get the capacity right the first time, because you're going to save yourself a lot of money. And also, not to be forgotten in this, is plug-in hybrids, right? Plug-in hybrids, There's more than 24 vehicles on the market today. There's more coming out next year. They're not going away. The ones that are already on the road obviously have a lifespan, but also there's new ones coming out there. You know, with the Mercedes, BMW has an entire lineup of plug-in hybrids. Those are very unlikely to have the higher end of fast charging, if any fast charging. Today, you're really limited to one vehicle that can fast charge that's a plug-in hybrid. So don't forget about that audience. I know at some point when we get closer to parity, if battery electrics with large batteries get cheaper than plug-in hybrids significantly, then the market for plug-in hybrids will start to go away. But we're not there yet and won't be for a number of years.
So I guess the last question I have for you before I got to run to another meeting is, the investment in charging is not insignificant, and yet the return on investment is pretty difficult to calculate. So when I'm talking to potential charging hosts and operators, I'm saying, when am I going to break even? When am I going to start making money on this? And I think that's a magic 8-ball kind of question. But one of my colleagues keeps bringing up the compliance credit component that could come along with chargers. So in California, the low carbon fuel standard provides credits for the capacity of your charger. If you have a charger, whatever capacity, you get a credit towards LCFS compliance. EPA has been working for a couple of years on creating a tradable commodity market for e-RINs. So renewable electricity given to a electric vehicle could generate a credit for RIN. Are there other elements that potential operators should be looking at to defray the cost of their installation, to defray the cost of their operations, and accelerate that return on investment and the move to profitability?
Yeah, it's great that we're sort of taking the initial steps on low carbon fuel standard credits. Obviously, California and Oregon are the only states today that really have assigned value to that. There are 5 other states that are considering that for electric vehicle charging. So we'll get there. It's going to be a legislative slog to get all these states on board. Once we see it in the majority of states, then there's a lot more value, obviously, for larger network operators to be able to aggregate and create value out of that. We're not there yet unless you're in California primarily. For the DC fast charging, it's tough. You obviously can charge a lot more for the energy that's delivered through a higher power charger. So in some ways, the economics can be a little bit better because at least you can make back higher dollar values faster. But again, the equipment is so much more expensive. For level 2 charging, think of it more as an amenity and think of it as a way to sell other things. And that to a certain extent makes sense on the DC fast charger, right? If you're increasing dwell time at your location, you get more people there for longer periods of time. It's that indirect revenue that can be the difference maker. If you're just saying, okay, if I'm selling, buying electricity at 11 cents per kilowatt hour and selling it at 13 cents per kilowatt hour, can I make money? The answer is pretty clearly no, not directly. But if I keep people at my location, if I get EV drivers to come as a differentiator to my hotel, to my park, to my store, that can be a great value, and in adding indirect revenue, they can get that payback much faster. And certainly, unintelligent, simple level 2 chargers, relatively inexpensive to install. You can get a number of those, and you don't have to make a big financial commitment. But again, you can get people to stay there longer, or it's a differentiator. Of course, we have the charging maps that tell you where to go to find them. That's becoming a differentiator. So we're starting to see more and more EVs out there. People want to know where they can charge, kind of like 10 years ago. Where do I get free Wi-Fi, right? That's why people would choose Starbucks over their local coffee shop at a time, because it's an amenity that's there. It's a differentiator. Now, of course, Wi-Fi is ubiquitous, and someday, hopefully, we'll get there with EVs. That charging it'll be hard to not find charging.
Right. John, thanks, man. I appreciate it. It's always great talking to you, getting your perspective on it. I've always valued our conversations, and it helps me be a little bit smarter, not real smart, just, we're working on the margins here, right? But it helps me answer some questions a little more capably. So thank you very much for your time.
I appreciate it. Great to talk to you as well, John.
All right, John. Talk to you later, buddy. See you.
All right. Thanks.